uh, wait for some more people to come in. Shomo?
I think we could begin.
Okay. So, welcome everyone. I'm really happy to be able to launch this very first ever Almost Island online event in a series which we are calling Readings and Reflections. This was an idea that came from our new and younger editorial team, new as of January this year. And I use the term younger here in the sense of keenness, creative energy, and looking forward. The team is comprised of Shoradeep Roy, who's currently doing his PhD at Queen Mary's in London, Shomo Ghoshal, who's books editor at Mint Lounge, Mantra Mukim, who's doing his PhD at the University of Warwick in England, and Bharat Iyer, who is an archivist at the French Institute in Pondicherry. They're all emerging poets, writers, scholars, and I think that Almost Island is very fortunate to have them to make this new editorial team. And Rahul Soni, of course, remains with us as advisor and a friend of Almost Island. This evening, for our first event, we have a poetry reading by two very gifted young poets, Sohini Basak and Arun Sagar. I will hand it over to Bharat now to introduce Sohini and begin the event.
So I'm just going to quickly introduce Sohini and then hand it over to her. She'll be reading out a few of her poems. Then we'll take a break and we'll have a brief conversation, and then we'll continue with the poems, and then show it open to the audience if they want to ask any questions or they have any comments they want to make. So very quickly, Sohini Basak's first poetry collection, We Live in the Newness of Small Differences, was awarded the inaugural International Beverly Manuscript Prize in 2018. She studied literature and creative writing at the universities of Delhi, Warwick, and East Anglia, where she was awarded the 2015 Malcolm Bradbury Continuation Grant for Poetry. In 2017, she received a Toto Funds The Arts Award. We're very happy to have you here, Sohini. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bharat. Thank you, Almost Island, for having me. What I'm going to read out today are poems from a long sequence called And Other Stories. Just give me 1 minute to share my screen. There's some poems that should appear on the screen as I read along. Babui. The weaver bird only confides in your great-grandmother, whose name is another word for the river, who wrings her sari each afternoon and stretches its shade on the line. Something so white laid out to dry, the weaver bird is prone to mistaking it for that one story everyone wants to hear, in which the bird saves the farmer boy the old witty way. Some say that the weaver bird carries a bit of cow dung and a few glowworms to make his home visible from the inside. Some say the weaver bird started this rumor. You want to ask the weaver bird how he keeps the glowworms alive between the beak, but the weaver bird will not teach you his soft-mouthed craft. The weaver bird will fabricate lies 9 yards long and supple enough to pass through a ring. The weaver bird knows that your family is waiting for the lift before the glide, the call of the sky, so that when they all leave their hollowed out art hanging from a branch within your reach, you will add one more nest to your collection, find one more room for keeps. Tuntuni. But it was the tailor bird who taught me to sing with my mouth closed, to measure each wager and never to underestimate a person who could stitch. Hiding is difficult if the passion is to sing, the tailor bird said, trying out each thread, Bombax windfall to spider's lot settling for a nest of fragrance amongst nylon vines. The night blooming jasmine has sweeter names, but summer is dry, is a dusk, is a stalk of simpler jasmines on a gunmetal plate, floating on a film of water or dying a slow death. The tailor bird fears the plaintive cuckoo who will slip in the wrong subplot at a cue meant for someone else. Whatever happens must appear as prevention or permission. The tailor bird has stationed me where the roots end and the jasmine tree begins in an undoable gnarl the eye can't splice, where each morning my mother or my father will add tea leaf mounds that look like upturned hives to nourish the soil, which at night turns into a stage, where everyone must exhibit a song or a skill. So elaborate a stage the tailor bird left before teaching me the refrain. And a passerby who I thought was there to listen decides to speak instead and says, let's face it now, the story will proceed at the will of the one who holds that thread. Chorley. Something about chilies drying in the heat. The crow said yes to the sparrow who challenged that she could digest more grains of wheat than he could chilies. What is the prize? The crow said. And the sparrow said, whoever wins will feast on the other bird's heart. The crow asked, liver included? And the sparrow said, fine. The probable tenderness of sparrow liver was better than any carrot, and the chilies were gone in no time. The sparrow sighed and said, okay, but just this is my last wish. Could you please wash your beak before you touch me? No one trusts what you eat, and the last thing I want is to be alive yet unclean. So the crow goes to the river, but the river says the same thing. The crow thinks all food turns into drops. Then our crow goes to the potter, jug, scoop water, no clay. Bull, horn, dig earth, a straight no. Pie dog, hired ruffian, revenge, needs milk for muscles. Holy cow, milk please, a study of our food chain. Field of grass, come get it, wanted a machine. Then, then the then the crow goes, then the crow goes to the ironsmith to borrow his sickle, and the ironsmith, being a lonely man whose wife left him, said, I'll make you the finest sickle. Sit down in that corner where it's not so clean while I forge. The ironsmith punched, bent metal, upsetting metal on bricks and anvil. Here is my hot masterpiece, but please don't carry it in your unclean beak. And the crow thinks about changing his diet or bribing his ornithologist to erase the hierarchy of caste. The image of picking at and culling sparrow ribcage, the taste of liver with half-formed carbohydrates overwhelms him, and he says, oh, just place it on my wings, the myna preened them yesterday. Then it becomes that story, regurgitated, of wings catching fire. Only on this side, no one died dreaming of or flying or fleeing. There was nothing, and there was nobody outside the window, I mean. But I was so scared that mother had to count my pulse and say that I was okay. She laughed and said, your heart is a sparrow. Was it you who caused this palpitation? Was it you outside with your scare the sister tricks? I wonder now. But do you remember that it happened once? It almost happens all the time, you and I who have seen the inside out of the same nests and have swallowed the same bird's eggs. Although where the twigs came from, we are yet to know. Sometimes the room is so full with stories that the people cannot get out. And when I point out that the branches are all of different shapes, you smile. But when we sit in silence, just you and I, the same word comes out of our different mouths at the same time. Twin birds in sudden flight. Was it the simultaneous fear of darkness that stirred them into a single motion? It is so astonishing that we don't want to ruin this miracle wherein. So we sit still and watch the air turn into water and the birds into fishes, and we try to extend the next moments until we hook that one word we will both say out loud next. Babui. The weaver bird knows your great grandmother, whose name is another word for the river. who only confides in dreams. The dream of the first to die comes to the last to be born, so the confrontation everyone wants to hear is between two aging mirrors, in which one says, "You are the worry." You want to ask the weaver bird how he keeps the glowworms alive. Some say that the dead know everything that will happen to those not dead yet, even things other than dying. Some say the weaver bird started this rumor. You want to ask, but the weaver bird will not teach you his soft-mouthed craft. The weaver bird only says, what the dead do not know or cannot tell is if you want to know it all. Sometimes as you write them down like dreams, these things happen. Deaths more than births because births take more time or are supple enough to pass. Deaths more than birds waiting for the lift. Truth is, when I first dreamt of the dead, I did not mind her telling me, but I told her to let the others be. Keep them away from the branch within reach. And she smiled. A little bird, a little death. There's no one harmed, she said. The weaver bird knows. I will stop here now before we proceed to the next plot.
Thank you. That was really extraordinary. And I mean, the first thing that strikes someone who's reading the poems or listening to it, and you shared the screen, so I hope the others are also able to see, is that there's a lot going on with the shape of these poems in the sequence. And in a sense, the poems they come across like windows into the non-human world. And even the clearest window will throw a hint of reflection back at you in the right kind of lighting. And so, in a way, the poems remind me that we still have only human means to understand the non-human world, names and stories and memories. And that gets at the problem of poetry itself, which is that we only have language to make sense of things, even that which escapes and defies it. And so my question is, how did you arrive at these forms for these poems? And where do you see the visual element of these poems, the way a poem looks on the page, in relation to other elements of form and prosody, like say line breaks and rhythms and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Bharat. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and let me just. Yeah, so the poems, they literally arrived because 1 December, when I'd come home for a vacation for 3 consecutive days, as I was sitting, I think in this very room, 3 birds came in and they were trying to escape and they couldn't. And I had to just run out of the room because it was so scary for me. I don't know why. They should have been the more scared creatures, but I was scared. So there was that. And at the same time, I was trying to write different kinds of poems to what I was writing before, which was the plain lyric. And I was trying to see if a series of poems can sustain a narrative. And even if they don't have stories to each poem, can I tell one story, maybe the same story in different poems, or can I pack in a lot of stories into one poem? So it was mostly to do with how I wanted to tell stories in the form of poems. And of course, then there was all these stories I knew about birds, which are mostly from old Bangla folk tales and fairy tales that I had heard from my grandmother. And the shape also arrived because of that, which is when I heard these stories, they were told to me in order to put me to bed, to make me fall asleep at night. And so lying beside my grandmother, here in most parts of West Bengal, we use a mosquito net, which is also like a rectangular, it constructs a room, like a net room above the bed. So if you are lying down and you see, there's like a crisscross of lines that go perpendicular and parallel to each other. So it was also that. So the impression of that image has also been a reason behind the window, the shapes, and the gap. I think helps the holes and the gaps in the poems. I think they just help me situate certain stories that I know that this isn't enough to be writing this poem, isn't enough to record that story or that memory or that particular fear that I had when the bird came in. This cannot be enough, but it's there. It's like there's hesitation, there's fear, a lot of it is about fear, very palpable fear. If you've seen birds flutter against windows, or just, like some birds in cities with glasses and glass buildings, they just come and get smacked on the walls. So you see their movement. There's also that. So, but that's all. Yeah. So how do I process all of that when I tell the stories?
It struck me that there's a strong sense of intertextuality that runs through these poems, both in relation to the stories that inspired them, but also, for instance, in the way in which the white spaces of some poems almost seem to be filled up by the black ink of another. So, were you consciously thinking of these kinds of connections and relationships between the different poems that make up the sequence? Or did you know from the start that this would be a sequence, or did that just happen somewhere down the line?
No, I did not know from the start. So the very first poem, which I don't know how to read it out, which is what I had in the very first. It's when a bird. It's just a bunch of words repeated. That's kind of like an incantation almost that started off this sequence. I didn't know it would be so long, but the shapes and how the intertextuality, yes, somewhat, yes. When I was building it up, I was also thinking about repetition. I was reading a lot of poets who really celebrate repetition in especially in trying to move a narrative in a way that's different from the usual beginning, middle, and end. I mean, you repeat and you don't necessarily go back in time because you repeat. You repeat and another part of the same story, but a different part opens up. It's like flashing a light in the same room, but in different times of the day, like how the sun will strike it. So there was also that, like, how do I use repetition to make things new in a narrative sequence of poems? There was that.
Thank you. On that note, would you like to continue? Read some more poems for us, and then
Yeah.
maybe we can
I'll
open it up
share
to
my
discussion.
screen again. The first thing I broke was a bird made of colored glass, a red and green bird made green and red with glass that my mother had found at some fair she went to some years ago, some years before I was born. And I broke the bird, and after breaking it, I cried. Although what really happened was slightly different. I was only holding the glass bird up against light to see through it, to see if it had a brain, a heart, all those things that I was told I had, or if it was completely hollow. But then the glass slipped out of my hand, and the bird slipped out of the glass, slipped out of the glass that held its shape, the shape of the glass that held it in place, and instead of rising, it fell. So I picked up the broken pieces without cutting my fingers. I took the broken glass bird, now a broken bird, now glass shards, once a bird. Although later I refused to pick up a different bird that needed picking up but was not made of glass. I held the pieces out to my mother, frightened that there was nothing, not a thing I could do to make the glass bird again. Shoku. Meanwhile, in a place not far from, in another time, they overfed the bull to turn him into cash cow. Goutless, pure calcium, he turned into a super flower. He lived on and even learned to love the yoke. In a place far, far away, meanwhile, in our time, the Indian vulture loved only cattle flesh more than gambling. When the time came, he got what he wanted, but lost his race to the poisoned bull who spoke in wheels. Meanwhile, in a place not far from, in older days, the vulture in his full plumage had the capacity to chase chariots, see through disguises. He was hired by husbands suspicious of their wives, but there too a sacrifice. Euthanasia, unwarranted intervention on high streets. Meanwhile, even when the forester drew a circle, the vulture could not overcome his habit of transboundary feeding. Meanwhile, these days, in a place not far from, in these suspicious times, he prays to the forester, whose friend the scientist regulates an incubator round as an egg, gambles with the right amount of heat, asks him, tell me, as it happened right from the start. Murgi. This is how the story ends, with the old woman lying down. True, I have wrung my word bank dry, but why must the little plant wither her head so? The little plant shudders. True, I wither at the end of your words, but how dare the cow threaten to eat me? The cow kicks a hoofful of dust on the twilight road. How dare the farmer boy still not take me home? And the farmer boy skips a stone on grass. It sinks, it knows that he has not eaten all day. Someone at the farmer boy's home says, how dare that banana tree deprive us of plates? And humiliated the banana tree weeps. If only it would rain. Eavesdropping this, the frogs agree. We would summon clouds had our tribes increased. How dare the snake gobble us whole? At this, the crate slinks back to fill his stomach. Why ever shall I not eat? The room is full with people you and I are meant to know. Everyone in the room has a story to tell, and they wait for us to finish our mind games, but we have only just begun. The stories cannot be new anyway. They start with tales of loss, of theft, where someone leaves or is left behind. I admire the trees outside. This afternoon cannot tell what you are thinking. It is not as easy anymore. I think everything changed when you left. The room is full of people you and I are meant to meet. Someone calls out our names to say the usual, how much you've both changed. We do not know this person, and I do not understand why the curtain is moving in a strange way. But your eyes are fixed on the stranger who seems to know us and our stories well. Is there someone outside the window, something lurking? Is this room secure with stories dying to be told? You see my fear and investigate. We're all okay. It is only a bird, a little sparrow caught here trying to get in. Do you mean get out? I ask. So you confess. It was me. When you were 3, it was me. Outside trying to scare you, I had tapped on the glass. But look now, this little sparrow is trapped no more. But I hear a heart pounding. Or is that the sound of stories being told? I ask you, and you say it's okay. It is nothing. There is nobody. Pacha. I give you an owl. Her feathers, beak, pupils are porcelain. Everything is white. I give you a blind owl the size of a closed fist. You know, as I do, that in the first story it is owl and monkey, the exiled siblings who float from sea to sea until they find some of life's right things. I know you have forgotten some details. The bug in the blood box, the safe clamor of faces, the sleep behind glass. I give you an owl to remind you of that first story and what happened to us afterwards. The places we went, the floors we kissed, the secrets we thrust under the foundation stand, where our house stands now, where we have not stood for a while, not with those dreams intact anyway. This owl is an insomniac. Let her repeat to you her blind tales. Leave her by the window wherever you are. Let her reflect and bring closer some of the oldest and wildest stars. Thank you. That's the end of my reading.
Thank you, Sohini. Thank you. That was really quite something. I've read the poems before, but being able to hear you read them out and being able to hear the assonances and the sounds adds a whole other layer to the poems. So it's really great. And just to start off the discussion, I think the audience can just put in their questions in the chat box. But just to start things off, maybe I'll just make one more comment. So you mentioned a little bit earlier when we spoke, and also in the notes at the end of your book, that the sequence of poems is based on a number of folk tales and children's songs and so on that you grew up with. Uh, so I was just wondering a little bit about what drew you towards these narratives and what drew you towards uh, these folk tales and stories and songs to build poems out of. because it's interesting that in a way as children, we all seem to come into language through the non-human itself, some level, through tailor birds and weaver birds and crows and monkeys and so on. So there seems to be some connection there with the non-human language, how we come to know it.
Yeah, so these stories mainly they're collected in two volumes of Bangla children's literature. One is Thakumar Jhuli, which is grandmother's kind of sack of tales, and that's mostly the more fantastical, as princes and kingdoms and sleeping princesses with two kinds of feathers, one on top of their head and one beneath their feet. It's a silver feather and a golden feather. You get different results if you pick each one up. The other one is Tuntunir Boy, which is a collection of animal folk tales, where the protagonist is a tailor bird, and he's very witty, and he outwits everyone from cats to nasty kings and so there's that. And a lot of these folk tales, like you've rightly told us, that we do encounter language through animal folk tales or rhymes or lullabies, and a lot of these I found out when I was reading them while I was working on the sequence, is about just plain things, like plain everyday things, like how do we get the food for lunch, or how do we stop someone from stealing our fruits, or how do we escape from being eaten. Very, very primal stuff. So I was very interested in the way it's all set obviously in a rural setup, so to go back to that. And because I was told these stories by my grandmother, she could also relate some of her childhood experiences, which matched quite a bit with the world of these folk tales. So yeah, that's where I was drawing from. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we have a question now from Shelly. Shelly, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you so much. Hi, Sohini. Hi, everyone. Good morning from Brazil, and it's good night in India, right? Good evening in India. Sohini, I'm a great fan of your poems. I have said this before, but I want to say it again, that your poetry book is kind of dip into meditation and mindfulness to me. The question I want to ask is that, did you have any kind of training in Buddhism or some kind of study of, the mind-only school of Buddhism? Because in your poems, I see a very distinct quality where, there is a very clear-cut reaching to the distinguish we can say that there's a very clear-cut distinction between the ultimate truth and the relative truth. The ultimate truth, which for the Buddhist school of Chittamatra or mind only school, is emptiness. Like, for example, in this the poem that you read, and this poem and the form that you have, of the poem, the format that you have, the form that you have, it also speaks of these two things, a form and a formlessness. So I want to ask that, from where do you get this kind of meditative quality in your poems? Did you have some formal training? Did you study a bit of Buddhism, or is it just your own evolution or your own observation or your own meditation when you are in nature that you arrive at these kind of realizations in your poems? I hope I've made my question clear, because I'm just thinking loud,
Yeah. No, thank you, Shelly. No, this is all absolutely new to me, and I will have to look up and read up on Buddhist texts to get exactly what you mean. But yeah, short answer, I'm not aware of the texts per se. Yeah, I will definitely ask you for some recommendations. But the formlessness came from, because number of these poems were written from a place of hesitation and fear, and like I said, when I was going back to the stories that I had heard and later read, they all had to do with primal feelings. So maybe the formlessness or trying to put a form to it comes from that. But also, as when I was writing the poems, I consciously did like writing exercises, like sometimes I do that when I'm stuck, is that give myself a shape or some kind of limitation, because forms, I mean, one definition of a form is that you're limiting yourself, like your thoughts, so that you can only use a certain number of words or syllables or meter or whatever the form requires you to. So I think it was more of a playing with the shape of the page and words and how they sound and what it does if I disconnect the sentences visually and you have to read across the page. Could you read the poems with four blocks? Could you read them in a different order? What would happen then? So things like that.
I think we have another question from Trey. I hope I'm saying your name right. Trey, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? And then we'll have time for one more question, and then we'll go on to.
Thanks, Sohini, for that wonderful presentation of poems. I'm definitely going to pick up your book. I was interested in the marriage of languages in your poems. The titles are all Bangla, and the way you spoke, the tone, the rhythm in which you spoke the poems, the recited the poems, it reminded me of some Bangla poetry. And so I was wondering how much of Bangla literary styles and literary projects have influenced your poetic endeavors.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think lullabies in Bangla, songs in Bangla, and fairy tales in Bangla is how I came to language and literature. So there's that. And the names, that the titles of each poem that are Bangla names of birds. I mean, there was absolutely no way I could use something like a tailor bird or a weaver bird in the title. I mean, I just had to put them in Bangla. There was just no other way. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. If you have any questions, just put them in chat or let us know and we'll unmute you. You can ask your question. So I think, should we move on then? I don't think there are more questions for now. I mean, okay, so thank you so much, Sohini.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your poems. Over to you, Mantra. And of course, if you have any questions, you can put them in chat and conversation can continue. So now I'm going to just hand it over to my colleague Mantra, who's going to introduce Arun. Mantra, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bharat. Thanks, Sohini, for that wonderful reading. Now we move on to the next half of the event, where Arun Sagar will read some poems and we'll have a discussion around that. Arun has published 2 books of poetry, Anamnesia, which came out from Poetry Wala in 2013, and A Long Walk in the Sunlight, which came out from Coppercoin in 2020. He lives in Sonipat and teaches in Jindal Law School. Over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Mantra, and thank you to everyone in Almost Island for having me. It's great to be here and to share the stage with Sohini. So I'll read a few poems from both my collections. So firstly from Anamnesia and then from A Long Walk in Sunlight. But I'll sort of go back and forth between them, not go in any chronological order. And then later, if there's time, I'll read a new unpublished poem. Summer poem. The city is turning inside out, emptying into summer images, lemon iced tea, beetles on the radio, red flowers on the green banks. And I am searching for a silence made of words, seashells on the mantelpiece, rich with sound, redundancies of words, searching for the target's eye, the very heart of summer. The wind turns into a stillness in the spaces of the crowd, Nights in the cathedral square, laser images, shadows, white, play of light on stone. And the words themselves are things of summer, not truths but absences, seagulls, patchwork clouds, this cage of images. And summer grows with every detail mapped and all its patterns planned and fenced in and beautiful. Okay, so the next poem is one that was interesting for me because it was the first time that I used some techniques of, indentation, line breaks, and so on that I ended up using quite a bit for a period after that. It's also one that I find a bit challenging to read because somehow the rhythm and the breath don't seem to go together too well, but I thought I'll still go ahead and take up the challenge today. So it's called Rhapsody in May. Evening slides through cracks in wooden shutters, fast moving as a cloud that grays a forest, with the fork-tailed swift in flight flickering below as the sun bestows its final glimpses on us who today have seen what a gust of wind does to the cherry tree in bloom and how specks of light can trap themselves in the long microscope of the eye. Yet incomplete remains the chosen image, unable to rid itself of lyric shape and given name, its power of recall, its perpetual likeness to what we have seen within it. Even so, the knife's edge scrapes at the chopping board, the page softens in the palm, cayenne and coriander mix on the buds of the tongue. Such charms of color and line, such chords being discovered as the shelves fill up with theorems to be proved. Fragments, pieces of a picture unformed but formed enough to take us forwards or back to the first imprints of love or fear in the wet cement of the soul. See how quick the weather changes. Roots pull up their fistfuls of earth. Runners crowd the forest paths. The day tilts inconstant as the breeze, unable to gauge the pace of its own inevitable progression or predict where it will end. But here, on the other hand, are powers without shapes, foresight, X-ray vision, coefficients, ratios for the petal and the rings in the tree trunk, phonetic alphabets, uncountable syllables, 10,000 halves of the brain. The light flickers, something crackles in the wires. We return to the open book next to iodized salt and insistent bottles of oil. The lungs fill up with water. Wind shivers the panes. Choral voices rise from the empty billiards room, and now the street lamp sounds a long yellow note across the variegated darkness through shutters that never completely close in the hour-long wait for sleep, as the soul seeks to become present and coldly passionate as the saxophone, and night turns itself inside out, and the threads fray, and the seams widen in this black cloth of many shapes. Sleepless. Somewhere in the sleepless country, a man watches a spider on his wall. He watches it so long, he is one with the spider. He watches himself crawl to the ceiling and looks down upon himself in his crumpled sheets. The clock ticks on, and the man is one with the minute hand. It moves too slow, too fast. Like the spider, it does not move at all. Night is crawling all around, and he feels its touch, now on the calf, now on the arm. The man wants to embrace the night. He wants to hold you in his arms. For this moment of wakefulness, he is one with you and sleep. Everything is in its place and liminal. Window. 4 hinges, 2 panes, 3 violins, and a rearview mirror. It is true that the words are the things the words say the things are. So this next poem was written at a time when I was staying in a studio apartment that had a very large window with quite an extraordinary view into the city, over the city, and for miles and miles into the distance. And so I felt somehow that that view was so extraordinary and so dominated that apartment that the time that I lived there was somehow entirely tied up with that view. And this is the poem that came out of that. Eyesight. At night, I know the sorrows of the city. Its rooftops take shape in darkness. Its lights remain the same, but windows form around them. I too have distant fires on river banks, far points of light refracted. I too have music low and slow, carefully selected. Sometimes I see my breath condense upon the window pane. Sometimes I hear a bird well past the hour of sleep. Sometimes I too take shape and can be seen. Believe me as I believe. Through centuries, the spires rise to greet me. As darkness falls, a bridge turns luminous blue. So I'll read one more poem and then I can take a break. So this is from the title sequence in A Long Walk in Sunlight. So it's a sequence of 20 poems, each named after a street or a square in the city of Rouen. So I'll just read the first one. A Long Walk in Sunlight. Rue Jeanne d'Arc. A reef of cloud. One could almost walk upon it. One could almost stand on its edge and look down upon the slatted, equidistant roofs, the tall cranes at attention, the boulevard stretching down to the river. One could turn around into the sun. One could watch another island approach from over the hill, striking across the river's curve. One could stand and play with the swift in flight, unperturbed. One could see what it sees. One could choose to step off. Thank you. I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Arun. That was fantastic. I have a lot of questions, but what I want to begin with is probably, if you'd like, you could speak a little bit about the title Anamnesia and what I think is the role that memory plays in this kind of almost like a labor of memory that runs through both the collections. I think it seems like memory is both like a gift and a burden for the voice that speaks through the poem. And at the same time, not to nitpick, but like the one phrase that I thought was like kind of consistent in both the collections was sliding through the cracks, but you use it differently in both the collection, and that seemed fascinating to me in a way that every time you evoke a memory or every time you sort of go back and recollect, it seems like memory comes from a place which is not the present place. It is kind of leaking through another place, through some other place, and I was wondering if you'd like to speak a little bit about both the title and what it means to recollect in a poem.
So the first part of that I can answer easily about the title. The second part is a bit tough. I'm not sure exactly how to answer it. So the title is, I mean, simply just the anamnesia is the opposite of amnesia. That's I mean, I was very surprised actually that the word didn't already exist, because we have anamnesis and we had amnesia. So it seems like anamnesia would be a very logical word to have, but it wasn't really there. So it's the opposite of amnesia. It's the disease or the condition of not forgetting. And yeah, obviously, so memory is the theme that keeps is definitely the theme in the first book, also in quite a bit in the second. Now, I actually not sure what I could say about that, because I think that I feel that I don't choose the themes. The themes just happen. So if I mean, the themes sort of emerge through the writing. So obviously through the writing of a lot of these poems, I was obsessed with recollecting, with memory, with the idea that this is something that comes up again and again, that the past is, where does it exist? Does it just not exist at all, or if it exists, does it exist in the present? Is it here around us? So that was certainly a theme that kept if I tried to consciously avoid it, it would keep coming back in poems here and there, right? So at one level I could say that, but another, I think, memory is, I think, essentially part of poetry in general, right? Because it's a word is already a remembering. Describing something is already a remembering. Just describing whether it's an object or an emotion or whatever it is a remembering, right? So there's this line from Robert Haas where he says that a word is elegy to what it signifies. So I think the word is always automatically remembering, and so the very act of writing poetry is, I think, a kind of remembering.
Thanks. That's quite an apt response. I think, yeah, it's a perpetual recall, isn't it? I mean, slightly different question. You mentioned how reading out Rhapsody in May was slightly difficult because of the breaks and the rhythm. And I was also thinking of another poem that you have, which you might read this evening, Black Leather Shoes, where you have a line.
I was going to.
You were going to. So it starts with this wonderful line where you say word is play, and I was thinking, how does this play, the sense of frolic, actually operate in the composition process? Both through, not through exactly diction, but through like breaks, through rhythm, we also saw that a little bit in Sohini's work, how she arranges space. And I think you do it slightly differently through breaks, pauses, caesuras, and this kind of jagged rhythm that runs through a lot of poems. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So I think that, this is one aspect of that I sort of talk about or explain, and there's another aspect that just remains a mystery to me. So the use of the white space, the indentation, and all that is, just partly, at least as I write or as I compose, it's sort of guiding again the breath. So it's a different kind of pause that one can get from using the white space. So I've not written poems, like Sohini's, where you have different columns and space in the center. So I've not written that kind of poem. So the poems that I've written are usually, it's almost as if they are left aligned, and those lines have just been moved back and forth a little bit. So because each amount of space sort of guides, I feel at least, the pause that we have, the pauses between the lines, right? This is it, as you said.
Sure.
So that is, I think, quite straightforward as one is reading. Line breaks also have that purpose, of course. The other part, which I said is mysterious to me, is that I feel a strange energy that comes from this moving the line. So that's what I said about Rhapsody in May. That's the first time I did that. And I remember it vividly. I think that poem was written in 2008, maybe, or 2009. And I had a few lines written down for a while. And, they'd been sitting around for months. I'd been tinkering with them. They weren't really going anywhere. And then somehow I moved one line. So I'm typing on the screen. So, I can just press the spacebar or the tab button or something like that. And I had the sensation of moving one line. And I felt this explosion of energy somehow. The poem just rushed out after that. In 2 days, the whole poem rushed out. It had been stuck for months and months and months. And so just the where that energy comes from and what it means, I don't know how I could explain it. But I did feel that also this breaking a line. So we can have a line break that is got some kind of enjambment to it, or it's a bit, the enjambment is a bit violent. That is one thing that one can feel quite easily. But then I started breaking words across the lines, and I felt that that was also again this release of energy that somehow happened in that process of breaking a word. I remember thinking that I wanted to split the letter if I could, split the very atom of language there and get this release of energy. But so that's how I experienced it, that energy, at least at the time when I was writing a lot of these poems. I don't do it so much now, or in the second book, not that much. But what that means or how to explain it, or I don't have an answer.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's a wonderful response. A lot to think about there. Do you want to read a few more poems at this point?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me, just a second. Absences. The world is filled with Mondays and mint and wild grasses at the edges of the fields. People are waiting in the city, in large waiting rooms, reading newspapers. You are not here, but I am everywhere, turning the sunlight into sunlight, that chair into a chair, turning all things into their names. Now this next poem, I think it's fitting that I read it because it was published in Almost Island under a slightly different title. On the Ridge. Somewhere a sort of coherence has been lost, and now all I remember is the meal we spoke of and the butterfly that settled on my shirt. There were monkeys in the trees, and in your dream a poet stood upon a podium and did not speak. But there was something else that almost escaped the cracks of afternoon and is not yet lost, but needs to be approached with concentration. Not in the first memory of it, but in the truer recollection, no, collection of what was said. For things were said, and this time there were no spaces between the words, no silences of meaning. All meaning was in the words, and you and I were merely witnesses, present and conscious, capable of testifying to the facts. As when two former lovers meet on sober ground, a wedding or reunion, a solemn consecration, and bear witness to what had taken place, is taking place. Not mere ceremony then, but a rite of formal, if unspoken, cognizance. And between our steps, this unspoken moment hesitated before coming into being, like applause in a silent hall that lingers on the first loud clap, and then suffers through a few timorous ripples, before the flood confidently asserting the rightness of the gesture, the strong, full-bodied clamor, the validation not of the players, but of he who through the act of clapping participates. And as that now clearer moment shaped itself, we lingered in the early summer sun, while each version of the real jostled with its neighbor, claiming to represent the truest picture of events. Surely something more than the afternoon play of leaves and branches was en jeu, something to be sifted, sheaves to be untied and spread out on the grass. More wine, perhaps, is needed, and with the wine, a clearer sense of music. For the afternoon itself was music, by which I mean not melody, nor rhythm, but something else, the way the music fills the spaces of the rooms, while you wash the soap from your hands and walk, refreshed, back to your desk. A playlist, then, carefully selected, organized to match the moment and its needs. As with an early morning call to prayer, stirring your lover in your arms, not rousing you from sleep, but reminding you of its impossibility. And in this wakefulness, you and I have vanished into afternoon, its dappled shell. We are contained within it, can never emerge from it. The music is like dust visible in a column of sunlight. And through our presence there, we may appear. October. Old photograph. Bittersweet, one could call it. Your dress maroon, fashionable glasses. I cried a little when I saw it. Outside, leaves, October, the river in its watery skin. On the Rue Saint-Jacques, women wait, black heels, black leather. Now I'll read the poem you mentioned, Manta. Black leather shoes. Black leather shoes. All is wordplay, word as play, and as each particular takes away a part of myself to fill in the gaps in myself, I can only speak of the unnecessary, the images and ways, the flock that sprays itself across the evening. And so all this is but the comforting resolution of the mind over meniscus and radii, the future that is waiting on eBay. And I am left alone with winter's stock of images, Christmas trees in January, black leather shoes. And all is perfect in decrepitude. All is addition, concatenation, collation. All is connected by the and. I can but swing forth and back from and to like. Like, all is metaphor. Unavoidable as Swiss cheese. Il a fallu qu'on introduise le corps, the old man said. The body is a tyrant, yes, and like are both escape. Bilingual dictionaries, black leather shoes. All is rhythm and blues. All is comprehension, interpretation, summation, in between, coming from, moving to. I got nothing to lose. I got my black leather shoes. There is no and or like, mere illusion, shadowy rhetoric. All is introduction, refrain, intermission, repetition, refrain. I must speak to you. I must speak to you from the scented lemon groves, from the hot sun, in summer blues and lavender and shoes of black leather. And all is September, October, drawing back towards you. O white heat of summer, I must return and speak to you. High beam. High beam in Delhi traffic, two little suns just for me. No one else can see their brilliance or the darkness in between. For this moment, nothing else exists, not engine, car, nor traffic light. Enough seen, now in this blindness, to not see will give me voice. Am I out of time? How am I doing for time?
You can read one more poem, Arun, if you want.
Okay, I'll read one more. Actually, I'll pick a shorter poem. The one I had is quite long. Voyage. Of late, I sometimes sense the absence of the perfect absence that was me most perfect. An absence more present than presence, but now absent. An absence becoming so present, it loses itself. Like something turned so far inside out, it becomes inside in again. Like a ship gone so far in one direction, it nears the port from where it started out. This too is voyage, all night in one direction. And now at break of dawn, the cat scratches at my door. All day I fill bowl after bowl, all day she comes and goes. At night the hedgehog eats. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun. That was lovely. I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions. I'm going to open it up, except I want to ask one last question myself, which is to do with how the poems are addressed to an invisible you that you do not name in most occasions. And I wonder how important is it for you to address your poems to this you, but also attached to that question of address is perhaps the question of community and context. And do you, like a lot of young Indian poets who grew up contextless, having read only British or American poetry in school, and then discovering, like myself, would have discovered Indian English poetry through Arun's anthology. I wonder if we can expand that question of address to also the question of how these poems, if you think of them as fitting together with a larger community or a literary kinship of sorts of Indian English writing at all. Was that ever like a factor in how you were creating things, how you were writing?
Okay, I'll take the second question. So certainly, I think when I came back to India from France, I consciously wanted to seek out other poets, and because earlier I had not met any poets or been in touch with them, any Indian poets or been in touch with them. So the sort of kinship at a personal level was definitely something I seek out in many different ways, reading groups and things like that, as and that so many friends among this in this Indian English poetry scene, if one could call it that. But in terms of while actually writing, do I have this in mind? No, I would say no. I don't think so. Right? I mean, I'm sure it's there. I mean, sure, everything you read can influence you in some way, right?
Sure.
But I'm not consciously thinking of it in these terms now.
Yeah, that's the only reason I was connecting the address in your poems to the you, to perhaps like a kinship of sorts, which is outside the poems. But
yeah, so the you is so the you varies. I mean, the you comes so many times in the poem, so it's very often a different you in different contexts.
Sure.
Right. Plus, I think you is a very nice address in poems in general, right? Because then the reader feels that they are being addressed. So I think that works. That can work well also.
Sure. Okay.
I know there's some. I mean, I don't do that consciously, but there's some poets who I really get the sense that the you is the reader. So that is quite something. I think I've done that with that in mind only a couple of times, but I know some poets who do that. Yeah.
Right, within like the dramatic monologue kind of format, where you're like an eavesdropper as a reader. Right. Enough of my voice. Are other people in the chat posting things, or you can actually speak up directly if you want. You can raise your hand so I can call you out. There are a lot of compliments in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, Shelly, do you want to go first?
Yes. Okay, so hi Arun. Arun, it's the first time that I'm hearing your poems, and it's definitely mind-blowing. I'm sorry I'm not very familiar with the contemporary poets in India, most of them, because I'm not there, I'm very far from there. I found it very interesting when you said that word itself is remembering. Word is memory, right? Because if we do not remember how we say things, we do not remember the words or the names, we forget. We might not forget, but sometimes we forget the words, we forget the mode of remembering. So, what I want to ask, it's more of curiosity, because I have not read your poems, and it's first time I'm getting to know your poetry, which is very powerful and very beautiful. It speaks to me, to be honest, especially because I have a language crisis and you talk a lot about words, and I'm dyslexic. So I definitely have this element of, words. And like in Sohini's poems, for example, word is not the only form of remembering. Even the form or the space or the gaps are forms of remembering. In your poems, do you see that other than words, you have employed some other forms of remembering? Just not in terms of format, but something that because I have not seen your poems, so I'm just asking you, I'm curious, I want to read your poems now. More of a curiosity than a question,
Yeah, no, I think, thank you. No, I think that, no, I wouldn't say there's any other sort of mode. As I said, the words are, themselves I mean, memory after all. I think that is unavoidable when one is writing. So I mean, I'll perhaps have to think about it a bit more later, but I'm not. Yeah, I don't think I would. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's any other form of remembering as such. No, but as in there are two things. I mean, the words are often addressing remembering, or talking about remembering, and then at the other level, I mean, as I said, the words are themselves remembering. The very fact of the words there. Sorry, I don't think I've answered your question very well.
No, actually, I think there wasn't a question. There was more of a curiosity, and I also feel that. I'm sorry, my dog is speaking a bit too much. I think when we quite honest, so I feel that when we have questions to the poets, there are no straight answers. There's more of a dialogue, reflection, isn't it? So thank you so much. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Arun, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Thanks, Arun. Thanks for question/comment. That's a classic, isn't it? So no, I mean, it's actually I managed to whittle it down to a question, which is like how important is a sense of place in your poems, Arun, like when you're writing? Because places do figure a lot in your poems, but often they link to say the narrator's biography, or they seem to be linked to the narrator's biography in a strong way. And there's often like it feels like crucial bits of that biography are, in a sense, unavailable to the reader, or there's a hint of mystery around them.
Good. Mystery is good. I think that there is a clear, I mean, for me, that there was a shift between the two collections. So the poems that are in the first collection and those in the second. I think for the second collection, there was definitely much more a sense of place, which, I mean, you can see the titles of streets and so on. So it was definitely very much there. I was consciously, at times consciously, especially for the title sequence, trying to map out a place, walking around and actually seeing where I was and, writing down stuff. So that was something that I had certainly not done at a time when I was writing the earlier poems in the first collection. So definitely the sense of place became more important at that time. Yeah.
Thanks, Arun. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun. Do we have any more questions? You could raise your hands or quick. Sohini. Yes, Sohini, please go ahead.
Hi, Arun. Thank you for the full reading. You didn't read this out, but in the new book, you have a very long poem at the end, and it opens with a very memorable line about film, using language as a film, and then there are multiple references, I think, to photographs, some photographs not being taken. So do you think of your poems as replacements for photographs sometimes? Like some of them are short, or film, for instance, because the last one is also quite long, and there's a meandering sort of a movement in the way it also is printed on the book. So just what is the relation with photos and films to your writing, if there's one?
So yeah, thanks. So I think that again, for this collection, for A Long Walk in Sunlight, it's a much more visual collection. I did have that feeling that I was, again, trying to describe what I saw in a sense, which is of course not truly possible, but I sort of felt I had that impulse. And in terms of that last poem, so what I think I'm saying there is that, what I'm feeling in writing is the inadequacy of language so it cannot replace image, it can't replace film, but and that is the medium I have, and that's the medium I'm stuck with sometimes. And so I feel that, I mean, I wish that I could work with a visual medium. I find that urge, I mean, in the poem. So that's why I think what's the first line is something like that, right? I must speak a language, not of music, but of film. So the search for a visual language. So I would say that I don't think the poems are replacing photographs or films. They are trying to perhaps, but they can't succeed.
Thanks, Arun. There's another question from Meera. Do you want to ask her a question, Meera?
Yeah, my first, I have two questions actually. My first one is addressed to both Sohini and Arun. So much of what I saw in the form of your poems, and especially what Arun said about the composition of Rhapsody in May, and also what I saw of Sohini's, seems to come from or be dependent upon composing at the computer or with a keyboard. And I was just curious as to whether you have ever written by hand, whether you think that the poem manifesting itself in these forms is dependent on using the keyboard, and what would be the difference. I mean, of course, poets have done this before. You had George Herbert playing around with shape before even typewriters. But since you connected it to actually physically working at the comp and using the enter key and so on, and I could see that in Sohini's poem, especially the one with the empty space in the middle. So that's one question for both of you. And the second is addressed to Arun, and it follows from Shelley's question about, do you use anything other than words? Do you feel that when you use a particular form, like a sonnet or a villanelle, that filters or it has any kind of effect on how memory emerges in that poem? Because, each form has its own memory attached to it. Like all the people who wrote sonnets before, or all the people who wrote villanelles before, or if you're writing in a particular form, does that tie up to memory? Thanks.
Sohini, you want to answer first about the comp?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you, Meera, for the connections. Yeah, no, these poems, I mean, the first one I did write by hand, the very one that I don't read, which is just a bunch of words being repeated, because that was like very small and I was able to do it with my handwriting on a plain blank paper. But then for the rest of the shape poems, I immediately had to use a word processor, and it gave my publisher a lot of grief as well when the book was being typeset. So, and there are also some, because the shape had to be very particular, I also use some unconventional spacing between words, which sometimes breaks sentences in awkward places. And I think some of the syntax is also slightly awkward, and I think I wanted readers to encounter certain awkward constructions of language, and to also see what effect that has on them. Maybe they'd pause and reread it. And I was also trying to see if those shape poems blocks, the blocks of four pieces of the poems, not even stanzas, if they could be read in different orders. So yeah, a lot of the poems that have shapes are definitely tied to the comp. Yeah. Arun?
Yeah, so I think last year I wrote, I tried to write a few things by hand, but before that I had never done so, or very occasionally, as in if I just had to take notes somewhere, I was out and I had to jot down a line, then maybe by hand, but otherwise I would work on the screen. And I found that I don't know if this is sort of paradoxical, but I found that I could feel the materiality of the words better on the screen, because I could pick them up and put them somewhere else. I could move them around. As if I'm writing, it's not the same. I want to move a word, I can't move it. I'll have to scratch it out and write something else later. Whereas on the screen, I can just pick it up and move it actually. So I found that a very sort of powerful way of writing in the poem, where I did some indentation and things like that. So I felt that was absolutely the working on the computer was important for that. In terms of the question about memories, about forms, so see, in my first book, there are 2 sonnets, but apart from that, I have not written any sonnets since then. I have not written villanelles. So I found it very interesting to hear that point about, the form having a memory, but I can't really say I have experienced it because I have not written in forms like that. So yeah, I don't have an answer for that. Sorry.
Thanks.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks everyone for their questions. So this has been a wonderful discussion, and I have the tough job of bringing it to a close. Sharmishta will like to say a few words before we break for the evening. Sharmishta.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much, Arun and Sohini, for both your readings. Thank you everyone for coming. And I really think that the conversation with both of you was really quite intricate and deep, much more so than I expected, because very often you never know how these conversations go. But I think today there was really a verticality in the questions asked and in your answers. So I think we've got off on the right foot as far as our first online event is concerned. Thank you very much, both of you. And thank you everyone for coming. And thank you to Bharat and Mantra for hosting both Arun and Sohini and with all your very insightful questions. Thank you, Shomok, for hosting all the technicalities. And I just want to say before we end that please join us again sometime in August, where we will have about 6 or 7 poets from Zimbabwe, curated by Togara Mutsunenhamo, who's an excellent poet who's been published by us many times and has also come to the Almost Island Dialogues in 2019. And we expect that to be an equally interesting event. So we'll keep you posted about that. Thank you.